My own family banished me from our hometown, calling me a disgrace who deserved nothing. Years later, after everything they had built collapsed, those same people stood at my front door, begging me to come back. By then, I had a choice they never imagined. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. Please stick with me until the end because this story takes a turn nobody saw coming. My name is Bria Hale, and for as long as I could remember, I had lived in the shadow of my family's expectations. No matter how hard I worked or how quietly I carried myself, I was treated like I could never measure up. My parents reserved their pride for my younger sister, Nyla, whose engagement to the son of a powerful political family became the biggest event our town had ever seen. Every guest admired her while I was barely acknowledged. The grand ballroom glittered with expensive decorations and influential guests when someone suddenly knocked over a glass of red wine across the polished dance floor. Instead of asking the staff to handle it, my father pointed directly at me. My mother coldly ordered me to get on my knees and clean the mess, saying I was finally useful for something. Laughter spread through the room as I silently grabbed a towel and knelt down, swallowing my humiliation. Just as I reached the stain, an elderly technology billionaire named Graham Mercer slowly rose from the head table. He stared at me in complete shock before speaking one word that froze every conversation in the room. "Boss." For several long seconds, nobody moved. Every conversation stopped as Graham Mercer crossed the ballroom without hesitation and gently helped me to my feet. His expression carried genuine concern instead of pity. Looking directly at me, he said, "I'm deeply sorry you were treated this way." Then he turned toward the stunned guests and added that no one in the room seemed to realize who I really was. The silence became almost unbearable as my parents exchanged confused glances. My father forced a laugh and asked Graham if this was some kind of joke. Graham ignored him. He explained that years earlier, when his technology company faced financial collapse, an anonymous private investment firm had stepped in with the funding that saved thousands of jobs. That firm belonged to me. After graduating from college, I had quietly built an investment company from the ground up, keeping my identity completely private. Even my own family never knew because I never wanted recognition or special treatment. Graham reached into his briefcase and carefully placed several official documents on a nearby table. He calmly explained that my company had legally purchased and managed the debt portfolios connected to both the Hale family businesses and the powerful political family's companies. Every contract, signature, and financial record was there for anyone to inspect. My mother immediately accused him of lying, while Nyla rolled her eyes in disbelief. My father insisted I could never have accomplished something so important without their help. Graham simply invited them to read the documents themselves. As the truth slowly became impossible to deny, the laughter disappeared, replaced by complete silence and faces filled with disbelief. Instead of showing even the smallest amount of regret, my father stepped forward with anger written across his face. He pointed at Graham Mercer and accused him of putting on a ridiculous performance to embarrass the family during the biggest celebration of Nyla's life. He demanded that I admit everything was fake and tell everyone I had paid Graham to lie. My mother folded her arms and coldly said I had always been desperate for attention because I could never accept living in my sister's shadow. Her words hurt more than I expected, but I refused to defend myself. Nyla shook her head with a smug smile and laughed at the idea that I could ever become more successful than the family she was marrying into. She insisted that political power mattered far more than private investments and declared that I would always be remembered as the jealous older sister who tried to ruin her wedding celebration. Several guests looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. They simply watched as my family tore me down one final time. My father then looked me straight in the eyes and said I was no longer welcome in the Hale family. If I walked away that night, I should never return to their home or expect to be treated like family again. My mother agreed without hesitation, saying they were ashamed to share my last name. They believed their influence and powerful connections would protect them forever. I looked around the room one last time before turning toward the exit. Graham quietly walked beside me without saying a word. As we reached the doors, I paused only long enough to say, "You won't have to worry about seeing me again." Then I walked away without looking back. Leaving my hometown was painful, but it also gave me the freedom to build a life that no longer depended on anyone's approval. I accepted Graham Mercer's invitation to step out from behind the anonymous identity I had hidden for years and become a visible partner in our investment firm. For the first time, people met the real woman behind the company, and I let my work speak louder than my past. Graham became more than a business mentor. He believed in my judgment, encouraged my ideas, and treated me like an equal in every important decision. Together, we expanded our investments into manufacturing, renewable energy, healthcare, and technology. We focused on companies with strong leadership and long-term potential instead of chasing quick profits. As the business grew, so did my reputation. Executives respected me because I listened carefully, honored my commitments, and never made promises I couldn't keep. Success came through discipline and patience, not family influence or political connections. As my resources increased, I quietly funded scholarship programs for hardworking students who couldn't afford college. I also invested in struggling communities by supporting local businesses, improving job opportunities, and helping nonprofit organizations without attaching my name to every donation. Seeing families rebuild their lives brought me more satisfaction than any headline or public award ever could. Meanwhile, back home, my parents and Nyla continued celebrating their political relationships, convinced they had secured a future that could never be challenged. They measured success by powerful friends and public recognition. I measured it by the lives I could improve and the trust one earned. Without realizing it, they were building an image, while I was building something far stronger, real financial stability that quietly expanded year after year. Back in my hometown, my family enjoyed the attention that followed Nyla's wedding. They attended exclusive events, hosted expensive dinners, and acted as though they had become untouchable. Wanting to keep that image alive, they borrowed millions of dollars to expand their businesses and finance ambitious projects. My father believed his new political connections would open every door, while my mother proudly told everyone that the Hale family had entered a completely different level of success. They spent freely, convinced that bigger investments would always bring bigger returns. For a while, everything appeared to go according to their plans. Then the economy shifted. Several business deals failed, construction costs increased, and expected contracts were delayed or cancelled. Income dropped, but the loan payments remained the same. Month after month, financial pressure continued to grow until keeping up with their debts became nearly impossible. Instead of cutting unnecessary expenses, they borrowed even more money, believing the next opportunity would solve every problem. Nyla's influential in-laws faced similar difficulties. Their companies had quietly relied on the same lenders to finance large expansions, assuming their reputation would always guarantee favorable terms. Desperate to avoid public embarrassment, both families submitted requests to refinance their growing debts and extend payment deadlines. What none of them knew was that those financial institutions had already transferred large portions of their debt portfolios to private investment firms. One after another, every request for restructuring eventually reached the same office. Each file was carefully placed on my desk for review. Without realizing it, the people who had thrown me out of their lives were now asking for help from the very daughter they believed would never amount to anything. A week later, my family's executives gathered for an emergency financial meeting, expecting to hear that their refinancing request had been approved. Instead, the lead advisor explained that ownership of most of their outstanding debt had been transferred to a private investment group. My father barely paid attention until the advisor mentioned the name of the firm's owner. The room fell quiet as he read it aloud. Bria Hale. My father immediately slammed his hand on the table and called the announcement ridiculous. He insisted there had to be some mistake because I was incapable of controlling companies worth billions of dollars. My mother agreed, claiming someone had stolen my identity or used my name without permission. Even after the company's legal representatives arrived with official contracts, certified records, and government filings confirming every detail, they struggled to accept the truth. Every document clearly showed that my investment group had legally acquired the debt portfolios connected to both families. Rather than admitting they had underestimated me, my father became even more determined. He confidently declared that I would never enforce the agreements because I still wanted their love and approval. Nyla nodded in agreement, saying I had always been desperate to belong and would forgive everything the moment they asked. She believed I would choose family over business without hesitation. They had no idea how much my life had changed after the night they threw me away. The woman they remembered had spent years trying to earn acceptance. That woman no longer existed. I had learned that kindness and weakness were not the same thing. I could show compassion without allowing anyone to take advantage of me again, and this time every decision would be guided by fairness instead of emotion. As the foreclosure deadlines drew closer, my parents finally accepted that they had run out of options. Every bank they trusted had refused to extend more credit, and the influential friends who once promised endless support had quietly disappeared. Left with nowhere else to turn, they traveled to my company's headquarters. It was the first time they had come looking for me since the night they told me never to return home. The receptionist called to ask whether I wanted to see them. After a brief pause, I agreed. When they entered my office, they looked around at the business they never believed I could build. I greeted them politely and offered them seats, treating them with the same professionalism I showed every client. Neither of them apologized. Instead, my father immediately explained their financial situation and asked me to stop the foreclosure process. My mother insisted that I could solve everything with a single signature. I listened without interrupting until they finished. Then I calmly reminded them of the engagement celebration where they ordered me to clean the ballroom floor while guests laughed. I reminded them how they disowned me in front of everyone and told me never to come back because I had embarrassed the family. My voice remained steady as I repeated the exact words my father had spoken that night. For a moment, neither of them answered. Then my mother sighed and said the past should stay in the past because family comes first. My father agreed, insisting that blood should matter more than old disagreements. Hearing those words, I realized they still didn't understand. They hadn't come to repair our relationship. They had only come because they needed something I now had the power to give, or refuse. I let the silence settle before answering. Then I calmly explained that I couldn't erase legally binding agreements simply because we shared the same last name. Every business owner who worked with my company was expected to honor their contracts, and I would not create a different set of rules for my own family. Fairness had always been one of the principles on which I built my company, and I wasn't willing to compromise it now. That didn't mean I wanted to destroy them. I slid a prepared proposal across the table and explained that I was willing to approve a complete restructuring of their debt. The plan would reduce immediate financial pressure and give their businesses a chance to recover, but it came with conditions. They would have to disclose every financial record honestly, sell unnecessary luxury assets, stop risky spending, and make employees and suppliers their first priority. Any questionable business practices had to end immediately. If they accepted those terms, my company would work with them instead of against them. My father barely looked at the proposal before pushing it back toward me. His face turned red with anger as he called the conditions insulting. He said I was treating my own parents like strangers and trying to control their lives. My mother ignored every detail of the agreement and demanded unconditional forgiveness instead. She insisted that because we were family, I should simply cancel the debt and forget everything that had happened. I quietly gathered the documents and stood up. I told them the offer would remain available for a limited time, but the decision was theirs alone. Without raising my voice, I thanked them for coming and walked them to the door, leaving them to choose between pride and a second chance. My parents left my office convinced they could still find someone willing to rescue them. Instead of accepting my proposal, they spent the next several weeks calling political allies, wealthy friends, and former business associates. They believed someone would step forward before the deadlines arrived. My father reminded everyone of the favors he had done over the years, expecting loyalty in return. My mother reached out to social circles that had once welcomed her with open arms. Each conversation ended with another polite refusal. The situation became worse as news of their financial troubles spread through the business community. Investors who had once competed to work with the Hale family quietly withdrew their interest. Companies canceled negotiations, and long-term partners decided it was safer to distance themselves rather than risk being pulled into failing projects. Confidence disappeared almost overnight, leaving my family's businesses struggling to survive. Nyla turned to her husband's influential family, believing their political connections could solve everything. At first, they offered reassuring words, but when they realized how serious the financial problems had become, they focused on protecting their own companies instead. They refused to guarantee additional loans or risk their own assets. Their priority was preserving their reputation, not saving relatives by marriage. One by one, every door my family expected to open remained firmly closed. The people they had admired for years suddenly became unavailable. Phone calls went unanswered, meetings were cancelled, and promises quietly disappeared. For the first time, they experienced what I had learned long ago. Influence built only on money, status, and powerful connections can disappear without warning. When the wealth began to vanish, so did the people who had once proudly stood beside them, leaving them completely alone to face the consequences of their own choices. Over the following months, everything my family had worked so hard to protect began falling apart. Court-appointed administrators took control of several businesses after they failed to meet their financial obligations. Expensive homes, vacation properties, and luxury vehicles were sold to satisfy outstanding debts. The lifestyle they had proudly displayed for years disappeared piece by piece. Every sale reminded them that appearances could not replace responsible decisions, no matter how powerful they once believed they were. As the companies changed ownership, many former employees began speaking honestly about the past. Some admitted they had always respected me because I treated everyone with fairness and patience whenever we crossed paths. Others remembered how I listened before making decisions and never looked down on people because of their position. They quietly acknowledged that if I had been allowed to help years earlier, many of the problems might have been avoided. Their words never reached me directly, but they confirmed that character leaves a lasting impression even when success remains hidden. One afternoon, Graham and I reviewed another successful investment while discussing everything that had happened. He looked at me thoughtfully and reminded me that real revenge was never about watching someone lose everything. It was about refusing to let bitterness control my future. Holding on to anger would only give my past more power than it deserved. His advice stayed with me because it reflected the life I wanted to live. Instead of celebrating my family's downfall, I turned my attention toward new opportunities. We expanded our company into additional industries, created more jobs, and continued supporting communities that needed investment. While my former family struggled with the consequences of their choices, I focused on building something that would continue creating value long after the pain of the past had faded. Several years passed before I returned to the town I had promised never to see again. This time, I wasn't coming back as the unwanted daughter everyone pitied. I arrived as the owner of the company opening a new manufacturing facility that would bring hundreds of stable jobs to a community that had struggled since several local businesses closed. Standing outside the newly completed building, I felt a sense of peace I never thought I would experience in the place where I had once been humiliated. The town looked different. Empty storefronts were slowly coming back to life, and local families spoke with excitement about the opportunities the new facility would create. Small business owners thanked my team for believing in the community when few others had. Many of the same neighbors who had once accepted the rumors about me approached with warm smiles. Some admitted they had judged me unfairly years ago and apologized for staying silent when my family treated me so badly. I accepted their kindness without holding on to old resentment. During the opening ceremony, community leaders spoke about new beginnings and the importance of investing in people instead of appearances. Watching local residents celebrate the arrival of new jobs reminded me why I had chosen this project. Success meant far more when it helped others build better lives. There was one noticeable absence that everyone quietly recognized. My parents and Nyla had not received invitations. After losing their businesses and influence, they no longer held the position they once used to control everyone around them. I hadn't excluded them out of revenge. The event was about honoring those who believed in rebuilding the town, and for the first time, I realized I had finally come home on my own terms. After the ceremony ended and most of the guests had begun leaving, I noticed two familiar figures standing near the edge of the parking lot. My parents looked older than I remembered. The confidence they once carried had been replaced by hesitation. For a few moments, they simply watched me from a distance before slowly walking over. Neither of them spoke right away. My mother's eyes filled with tears, and my father struggled to find the words he had probably rehearsed many times. My father finally admitted they had been wrong about me from the beginning. He said they had allowed pride, public image, and their obsession with status to blind them to the daughter who had always stood beside them. My mother quietly apologized for every cruel word she had spoken and every time she chose my sister over me. They asked if I would come back into the family so they could start over and spend whatever years remained trying to make things right. They wanted life to return to the way it had been before everything fell apart. I listened without interrupting, knowing this conversation had been years in the making. When they finished, I calmly reminded them that I hadn't left because of a misunderstanding. They had publicly humiliated me, disowned me, and told me never to return. They chose their reputation over their own daughter when I needed them most. Those choices had shaped both of our lives. I told them I accepted their apology, but forgiveness could not erase the consequences of the past. Some wounds heal, but they leave scars that never completely disappear. Time can move people forward, yet it cannot restore the years or the trust that was lost forever. I stood quietly for a moment before answering. I didn't want my decision to come from anger because I had spent too many years letting pain define my life. Looking at my parents, I could see that they had truly lost everything they once believed made them important. They no longer had the businesses, the influence, or the wealthy friends they had trusted. What remained was a family broken by choices that could never be taken back. I told them I wasn't interested in revenge. If they needed help finding a safe place to live, reliable medical care, or stable employment, I would make sure they had access to the charitable programs my foundation supported. Those programs existed to help people rebuild their lives with dignity, and I wouldn't deny them that opportunity simply because they had once hurt me. Everyone deserves a chance to move forward. My father lowered his head and quietly asked whether that meant we could become a family again. I gently shook my head. I explained that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I had forgiven them because carrying bitterness would only continue hurting me, but I could not pretend the past had never happened. Trust is built over many years and can be destroyed in a single moment. Once it is broken, there is no guarantee it can ever be fully restored. My mother wiped away her tears and slowly nodded. For the first time, neither of them argued or tried to change my mind. They finally understood that actions have lasting consequences. Some mistakes can be forgiven, but they cannot always be undone. Accepting that truth was painful, yet it was the first honest step they had taken in many years. Standing outside the community center my foundation had built, I watched children laugh on the playground while parents gathered nearby, talking about the future with hope instead of worry. The building behind me offered job training, after-school programs, and scholarships for young people who simply needed someone to believe in them. Looking around, I realized this town had become stronger not because someone powerful saved it, but because ordinary people were finally given real opportunities to succeed. As the evening sun settled over the streets where I had once felt unwanted, my thoughts drifted back to the night my parents humiliated me in front of an entire ballroom. At the time, I believed my life had ended when they disowned me and told me never to come home again. I couldn't have imagined that the worst day of my life would become the beginning of everything that truly mattered. Years later, the same family that had called me an embarrassment stood before me asking for another chance. I helped them rebuild their lives with dignity, but I never abandoned the boundaries that protected my peace. That decision wasn't made out of bitterness. It came from finally understanding my own worth. I no longer measured my value by someone else's approval. Respect, purpose, and inner peace had replaced the constant need to prove myself. My success wasn't defined by wealth alone but by the lives my work had changed and the opportunities one had created for others. Looking around one last time, I smiled quietly. The greatest victory was never watching my family lose everything. It was discovering that I had always been enough. The day they banished me wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment my real life finally began.